ಸಂಸಾರದಾವಾ ನಲಲಿದಲೋಕ ತ್ರಣಯ ಕಾರುಣ್ಯ ಘನ ಘನಾತ್ವಂ ಸಂಸಾರದಾವಾ ನಲಲಿದಲೋಕ ತ್ರಣಯ ಕಾರುಣ್ಯ ಘನ ಘನಾತ್ವಂ ಪ್ರಾಪ್ತಸ್ಯ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣ ಗುಣಾರ್ಣವಸ್ಯ ವಂದೇ ಗುರು ಶ್ರೀ ಚರಣಾರವಿಂದಂ ಪ್ರಾಪ್ತಸ್ಯ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣ ಗುಣಾರ್ಣವಸ್ಯ ವಂದೇ ಗುರು ಶ್ರೀ ಚರಣಾರವಿಂದಂ महाप्रभु कीर्तन नृत्य गीता वादित्र माद्यान मनसोरसेना महाप्रभु कीर्तन नृत्य गीता वादित्र माद्यान मनसोरसेना रोमांचकंपा श्रुतरंग भाजो वंदे गुरो श्री चरणारविंदं रोमांचकंपा श्रुतरंग भाजो वंदे गुरो श्री चरणारविंदं श्री विग्रहाराधन नित्य नाना श्रृंगार तन्मन्दिरमर्जनाधो श्री विग्रहारा श्रृंगार तन्मन्दिरमर्जनाधो युक्तस्य भक्तां शनियुञ्जतोऽपि वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं युक्तस्य भक्तां शनियुञ्जतोऽपि वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं चतुर्विधा श्री भगवत्प्रसाद स्वाद्वन्न तृप्तान् हरिभक्तसङ्घान् चतुर्विधा श्री भगवत्प्रसाद स्वाद्वन्न तृप्तान् हरिभक्तसङ्घान् कृतैव तृप्तिं भजत सदैव वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं कृतैव तृप्तिं भजत सदैव वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं श्रीराधिका माधवयोरपार माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनाम्नां श्रीराधिका माधवयोरपार माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनाम्नां प्रतीक्षणा स्वाधनलोलुपस्य वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं प्रतीक्षणा स्वाधनलोलुपस्य वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं निकुञ्जयूनो रतकेलि सिद्धै यायालिभिर्युक्तिरपेक्षणीया निकुञ्जयूनो रतकेलि सिद्धै यायालिभिर्युक्तिरपेक्षणीया तत्रातिदक्षादतिवल्लभस्य वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं तत्रातिदक्षादतिवल्लभस्य श्री चरणारविन्दं साक्षादरित्वेन समस्तशास्त्रैरुक्तस्तथा भाव्यत एव सद्भिः त्वेन समस्तशास्त्र उक्तस्तथा भावित एव सद्भिः किन्तु प्रभोया प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् किन्तु प्रभोया वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् यस्य प्रसादात् भगवत्प्रसादो यस्य प्रसादात् न गति कुतोऽपि यस्य प्रसादात् भगवत्प्रसादो नगति कुतोऽपि ध्यायां स्तुवां तस्य यस्य स्त्रीसन्ध्यां वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् ध्यायां स्तुवां तस्य यस्य स्त्रीसन्ध्यां वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् वन्दे रविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने नमः कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद जय श्री चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि भक्तवृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा जय चैतन्य चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत श्रीवासादि गौर जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि भक्त वृंदा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha, Nila Madhav Radha, Nila Madhav Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha, Nila Madhav Radha, Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha, Shyam Sundar Radha, Shyam Sundar Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha, Shyam Sundar Radha, Shyam Sundar Shri Radhe. Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhadra Ma, Jaya Sudarshan Chakra. Jaya Deva Brahma, Jaya Sudarshan Chakra. Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Sitaram, Sitaram, Jaya Lakshmana Hanuman. Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Sitaram, Sitaram, Jaya Lakshmana Hanuman. Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Jaya Lakshmi. Jaya Gaura Nitai, 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 Jaya Gaura Nitai. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavana ki jai, Nama Acharya Srila Haridasa Thakur ki jai, Premise Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopi Gopinath, Sham Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan ki jai, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Shri Mayapur Dham ki jai, Shri Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai, Ganga Mai ki jai, Yamuna Mai ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Tulsi Devi ki jai, Samaveta Bhaktavinda ki jai, Gaura Premanande Hari. All glory to the assembled devotees, all glory to the assembled devotees, all glory to the assembled devotees, all glory to Shri Guru and Gauranga, all glory to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Praladaladaine. Hiranyakashipurvakshah. Hiranyakashipurvakshah. Shilatankanakalaye. Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha. Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha. Yeto Yeto Yami Tato Narsimha. Bahe Narsimha Hrudaye Narsimha. Bahe Narsimha Hrudaye Narsimha. Hrudaye Narsimha. Narasimha भक्त विघ्न विनाशक नरसिंहदेव भगवान की, भक्त शिरोमणि प्रहलाद महाराज की, श्रील प्रभुपाद की।
Namo Namaha Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha Jaya Radha Krishna Seva Pabho Yai Abhilasi Radha Krishna Seva Pabho Yai Abhilasi Je tomara sharanalo Tara vancha purna ho Kripa kori koro tare Vrindavana vasi मोरा यही अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियोवा नयने हरिबो सदा युगल रूप राशि এই নিবেদন ধরো সখীরানুগাত করো নিবেদন ধরো সখীরানুগাত কর সেবা অধিকার দিয়ে করো নিজ দাসী दीना कृष्ण दास को ए जन मोरा हो श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेम सदा ये नवासी श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेम सदा ये नवासी यानि कानि चापापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्राणशान्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे यानि कानि चापापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्राणशान्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्राणशान्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्राणशान्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्राणशान्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्राणशान्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 राम 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 Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi. Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev.
O Tulasi, beloved Krishna, I bow down before you again and again.
My desire is
Service is Radha. Word of Krishna is beyond the faithful pursuit. Please have mercy upon him and make him a resident of Vrindavan. My desire to also grant me residence in the precious groves of Shri Vrindavan Dham. Thus within my wishing I shall always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower of Karma Dancer Braj. Please teach me the purest devotional service and make me your own maid servant. This very fallen and lowly servant of Krishna, may I always bring the love to Shri Radha Govinda. There are 10 offenses in the matter chanting holy names that should be avoided, and they are as follows. 1. To blaspheme the devotees who are dedicated to life for propagation of the name of the Lord. 2. To condemn names of demigods and Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, equal to independent name Lord Vishnu. 3. To participate in order of spiritual master. 4. To blaspheme the teachers of others who subsume to be worshipped. 5. To consider glorious chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6. To give some interpretation for the name of the Lord. 7. To commit sacred activities and strength of chanting holy name. 8. To consider chanting Hare Krishna as an auspicious spiritual activity, offering the daily as spiritual activities Dharma Kanda. 9. To instruct the faith express about glory of holy name. 10. To not complete faith chanting holy name, and to maintain material attachment in understanding so many instructions on this matter. It is also an offense in inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to Vaishnava must carefully guard against these sentences. In order to quickly achieve desired success, Krishna, Prema, now that the promotion of publicity under all the Vaishnava devotees are Shri Chaitanya Shikshastakam Ki Jai.
Chetudarpanamarjanam Bhava Mahadevaki Nirvapanam Shri Rakshayam Chandrikam Charanam Vidyavadu Jivanam Sarvatma Snapanam Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Bahudani Cha Sarva Saktis Tatra Pita Niyamitak Smaranina Kala Etad Risita Vakripa Bhagavan Mamapi Durdaivam Samihajani Nanuraga Trinada Pisuni Chena Tarura Pisa Hisnuna Amanina Manadina Kirtaniya Sadahari Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitamba Jagadisha Kamaye Mama Janmani Janmanishware Bhavatat Bhaktira Haituki Twayi Ai Nanda Tanuja Kinkaram Patitam Mam Vishame Bhavam Buddho Kripaya Tava Padapankajastita Dulisadrisam Vichintaya Nayanam Galadasruraya Vadanam Gadgadurudaya Jira Pulakani Sitam Vapu Kada Tavanamagrahane Bhavishyati Yugayitam Nimesena Chaksusapavrasayitam Sunyayitam Jagat Sarvam Govinda Virahena Me Aslishyava Padaratam Pinastumam Adarsanam Marmhato Karotuva Yata Tatava Vidadatu Lampato Mat Prananatas Tusavana Paraha Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Chaitanya Saksastakam Ki Jai. Glory to the Shri Krishna Sankirtan, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditional life, of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is the prime benediction for humanity at large, because the benediction is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to the living beings, and thus you have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names you have invested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names, but I am so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw on the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor, yet somehow or other I am fallen into this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up, and when will the hairs of my body stand on end at the recitation of your holy name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from your eyes like torrents of rain, and I am feeling all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he shall remain so, even if he handles it roughly by his embrace. It makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. Shri Chaitanya Siksastakam Ki Jai Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tanami Namaste Saraswati Devi Guru Vanachari Devi Setswani Paskati Shri Guru Pranama Prayers Ki Jai. Om Aganya Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chaksurun Yimalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sapitam Yena Bhutali Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Jataha Pachakamalan Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaguna Ragunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Saivaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Radha Krishna Padam Sakala Sagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Nivitam Sha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutali Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tinamini Namaste Saraswati Deve Gurvani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Pulskatya Desatarine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutali Shrimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Tinamini Shivar Suvanavi Devi Dayitaya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vigyana Dayane Prabhuve Namaha Madhur Ujvala Premadya Shri Rupa Nuga Bhaktida Shri Guru Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostate Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupa Nuga Varudapa Pasidanta Dvantaharine Namo Guru Kishoraya Sakshat Vairagya Murtaye Vipralambara Sambodhe Padambujayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sachitanandanamine Gora Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate Gora Vir Baba Bhavestvam Nirdesta Sajjana Priya Vaishnava Sababama Sri Jaganatayate Namaha Panchakalpa Durabhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Padayate Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namne Guritsuse Namaha Yes Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhakta Avataram Bhaktakam Namami Bhakta Sakitam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Vyayartam Suratur Pangur Mama Manda Mater Gati Matsarva Swapadam Bojo Radha Madana Mohano Divyad Vindaranya Kalpadrimadaha Shimad Ratnagara Simasanastito Shimad Radha Shila Govinda Devo Prestali Bihi Sevyamano Smarami Shiman Rasa Rasa Rambi Vamsivata Tatastita Karsan Venus Vaner Gopir Gopinatak Striyestrinam Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhi Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Stute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasri Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Guru Pranama Prayers Ki Jai Shri Brahma Samhita Ki Jai Ishwara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Anadi Radhi Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam Chintamani Prakata Satma Sukalpa Vriksha Laksha Vrite Susravir Abhipalayantam Lakshmi Sahasra Satasambrahma Sevyamanam Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Mainam Prananda Madhvendra Layataksham Parhavatam Samasitam Sundarangam Kandarpa Koti Kamaniya Vishesha Sobham Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chandra Kalasadvanamalya Vamsi Ratnam Gadam Pranayakeli Kalavilasam Shavam Jivangalanta Lita Prakasam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Yasya Sakalendri Vrittimanti Pasyanti Panti Kalyanti Chiranjaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastu Koti Satavatsara Sampragamyo Vayoratapi Manaso Manipungamanam Sopyasti Yad Prabhanisimya Vichintya Tattve Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ekopya Sora Chayatam Jagaranda Kotim Yes, Chakti Rasti Jagadanda Chayayadanta Anandanta Rasta Paramanu Chayanta Rastam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yad Bhava Bhavita Diyo Manajasta Taiva Samprapya Rupa Mahima Sanayana Bhusa Suktarya Meva Nigaman Pratitaistu Vanti Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasat Tabirya Eva Nijarupa Tayakalami Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhutto Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena Santak Sadeva Hidesu Vilokayanti Yam Shama Sundaram Achintya Gunaswarupam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Rama Adi Murti Sukala Nimena Tistan Nana Avataram Akarod Bhuvanesa Kintu Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Paramam Pumam Yo Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. We stop at Ramadi Murtisa, right? Right?
Translation.
Huh?
Translation.
Yeah, translation. Krishna, who is known as Govinda in this as the Supreme Godhead, he has an eternal, blissful spiritual body. He is the origin of all, and he has no other origin, and he is the prime cause of all causes. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the first progenitor, who is tending the cows, yielding all desire, in abodes built with spiritual gems, surrounded by millions of purpose trees, always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds of thousands of Lakshmis or Gopis. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is adept in playing on his flute, with blooming eyes like lotus petals, with head decked with peacock feathers, with the figure of beauty tinged with the hue of blue clouds, and his unique loveliness charming millions of cupids. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, round whose neck is swinging a garland of flowers beautified with the moon locket, whose two hands are adorned with the flute and jeweled ornaments, who always revels in pastimes of love, whose graceful threefold bending form of Shamsundar is eternally manifest. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, whose transcendental form is full of bliss, truth, substantiality, and is thus full of the most dazzling splendor. Each of the limbs of that transcendental figure possesses in himself the full-fledged functions of all the organs, and eternally sees, maintains, and manifests the infinite universes, both spiritual and mundane. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is inaccessible to the Vedas, but obtainable by pure unalloyed devotion of the soul, who is without a second, who is not subject to decay, is without a beginning, whose form is endless, who is the beginning and the eternal Purusha, yet he is a person possessing the beauty of blooming youth. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, only the tip of the toe of whose lotus feet is approached by the yogis who aspire after the transcendental and betake themselves to pranayama by drilling the respiration, or by the jnanis who try to find out the non-differentiated Brahman by the process of elimination of the mundane, extending over thousands of millions of years. He is an undifferentiated entity, as there is no distinction between potency and the possessor of thereof. In his work and creation of millions of worlds, his potency remains inseparable. All the universes exist in him, and he is present in the fullness in every one of the atoms that are scattered throughout the universe at one and the same time. Such is the primeval Lord whom I adore. I adore the same Govinda, the primeval Lord, in whose praise men who are imbued with devotion sing the mantra suktas told by the Vedas, by gaining their appropriate beauty, greatness, thrones, and conveyances and ornaments. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, residing in his own realm, Goloka with Radha, resembling his own spiritual figure, the embodiment of the ecstatic potency possessed of the 64 artistic activities in the company of her confidants, Sakis, embodiments of the extensions of her bodily form, permeated and vitalized by his ever blissful spiritual rasa. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is Shamsundara, Krishna himself, with inconceivable, innumerable attributes, whom the pure devotees see in their heart of hearts with the eye of devotion tinged with the salve of love. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who manifested himself personally as Krishna and the different avatars in the world in the forms of Rama, Nrsimha, Varaha, etc., Vamana, etc., as his subjective portions. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So it's very important to recite these wonderful prayers. Krishna is very pleased to hear us do that. And he's in our heart, and he's witnessing us glorifying him. And this is real glorification, this Brahma Samhita. So, of course, we're only doing a few of the verses, but if you understand just these few, that's enough to go back to Godhead. Okay, so now we're going to continue. We're in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. We'll do a slight little review of what we've studied so far. We've deviated a little bit from the Srimad Bhagavatam because this is a very important subject matter. The 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita tells us, 1, what are the 5 levels of Brahman realization? 2, what is real knowledge? And 3, how we can attain that knowledge and practice it. And 4, the pitfalls of that can keep us from developing this knowledge and how to avoid them. So it's a very important chapter, and so we'll just do a quick summary. Those 5 levels of Brahman realization are called Brahmapucham, the 5 levels of Brahman realization. This is 13th chapter, verse number 5. Bhagavad Gita, yes. And it says in the last paragraph, next to the last paragraph, that there are these 5 levels of Brahman realization, and they are the following. There is Anamoya, Pranamoya, Jnanamoya, Vijnanamoya, and Anandamoya. So, Anandamaya. So, what are these? So when it says Maya, it doesn't mean illusion. It says Maya would have 2 long A's. So Vijnanamaya, Jnanamaya, Pranamaya, Anamaya, these are levels of realization of Brahman. Now, what do you mean Brahman? Brahman means spiritual. So everything begins with Anamoya. When a child is born, when a baby is born, the first thing they're looking for is food. And if they find the mother's breast, they're very happy. So that's called the first realization of God. It's a material realization because food is a material thing. But it's related to Krishna because it's sustaining life. And that's what happens when a baby is born. It has to sustain life. So the first realization of God, which is a material realization, is Anamoya, the Ana, the grains or the sustenance given to the baby by the mother. Then, as some time goes on, there's Pranamoya, life symptoms. So they see, yes, my mother is a person, but there's some other persons also. There's the father, there's the uncle, there's the auntie, there's the brother or sister, there is other relatives. So the baby starts seeing pranamoya, or life symptoms other than the mother. Right? And then there's jnanamoya. The baby grows older, and there's mental understanding in the form of thinking, feeling, and willing. So the baby is thinking, it's feeling, and it's willing. I want to do this, I want to do that. And then, as the child grows older, there's vijnanamaya. They begin to differentiate between the body and the soul. Hopefully. A lot of people never get to that point, but if the child is properly reared or instructed, they will begin to understand that there is a major difference between the body and the soul. And they begin to pay some attention to the soul. And it says, Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. Okay. And then the next stage is called, or the supreme stage is Anandamaya. And what is that? It's realization of the all blissful nature of being in association of Krishna through devotional service or pure Krishna consciousness. So, when we talk about Brahman realization, the Mayavadis restricted simply to the impersonal Brahman. But we see that that's a false narrative. There's much more than the impersonal Brahman. There's impersonal Brahman. There is, it begins with Anamoya, and then Pranamoya, and then Jnanamoya, then Vijnanamoya, and ultimately Anandamoya, where one begins to constantly feel transcendental ecstasy in the association of Krishna and his devotees, and through devotional service and unflinching devotional service. So those are the 5 levels of Brahman realization. So that's why it says Vantita Tattvavitas Tattvam Yajgaram Advayam Brahmeti Pranamatmeti Bhagavaniti Sabhyate. First canto, 2nd chapter, I think it's the 6th verse. Anyway, it's one of those early verses. And it says that there are 3 levels of understanding Krishna. There's the Brahman, there's Paramatma, and there's Bhagavan. Now, all 3 of those put together is Brahman realization also. It's not just the Brahman effulgence. The Mayavadis stop there. The devotees, they go further to Paramatma and then to Bhagavan or Krishna. Okay. So you'll see that the words are being used, the same words are being used, but there's either incomplete definition of those words or there's false definition of those words. So therefore we have to read Prabhupada's purports to get the correct understanding of those words, because the Mayavadis use the same words, and I've given you examples before how their definitions are either wrong or incomplete. Okay, so now we go to the next 2 verses, 6 and 7, and this explains the 24 elements of the material world. And this is very important to understand. Usually it says that there are 8 elements, so in the 9th chapter, Bhumir Apol Nalo Vayu Kam Mano Buddhe Vicha Hankara Ityam Me Bina Bhaktirastata. I mean, let's see, that is the 9th chapter. Yeah, I think so. Let me just take a quick look. So these says that there are 8 fundamental elements. However, no, it's the 7th chapter, I'm sorry. However, those 8 fundamental elements are further expanded into 24. So 7th chapter, 4th verse says, Bhumir Apo Nalo Vayu. There are 8 fundamental elements in the material world: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. So there's 5 gross elements and 3 subtle elements. And then the next verse says, but besides this, there is the and this is called apara prakriti, the inferior spiritual energy, and then the superior spiritual energy, or parayam itastvanyam prakriti vidime param, is the jivas and the demigods. Demigods are also jivas. So all living entities and the demigods are the superior spiritual energy. Okay. And then besides that, parastas matubhavo nyo vyakto vyakta sanatanan, there is the spiritual world, which is all spiritual. Okay. So now, later on in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we see that those 8 elements are further expanded into 24. So that's the complete understanding of the material nature, 24 fundamental elements. So it begins with which is called the Mahabhutas, the 5 great material elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, earth, water, fire, air, ether. And then, besides that, there are the five senses: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin. And then besides that, there are the five objects of the senses: seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching, and so forth. And then there are the five working senses: the arms, the legs, the speech or tongue, the genital, and the anus. And then, so now we're at 20 elements. And then there's the three subtle elements: mind, intelligence, and false ego. And then there is the pradhana, or the source of the three modes of material nature, and the complete and the aggregate of all the elements. So the pradhana is the very subtle, let's say, state of the three modes of material nature, and then the manifest state of the three modes of material nature is called the mahatattva. Okay, so then besides that, there's also happiness and distress, desire and hatred. These are what you would call, these are interactions, representations of the five great elements in the gross body. And then besides that, there's conviction and consciousness. And these are living symptoms represented by consciousness and convictions, and manifestations of the subtle body: mind, intelligence, ego. Then besides that, the five great elements are the gross representation of the false ego, which in turn represents the primal stage of false ego, technically called tamasa buddhi, or intelligence in ignorance, or the material conception of life. Now, yesterday, again, second time, we went over what is the material conception of life. That's the fourth panel. And that's called tamasa buddhi, or intelligence in ignorance. And this further represents the unmanifested stage of the three modes of material nature, and that's called the pradhana. And the manifest stage of the three modes of material nature and the total material elements is called the mahatattva. Okay, so that gives us a full picture of the material body and existence in the material world. Now comes the 20 points of real knowledge. So you see, this is a very comprehensive chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And it says, Manidvam, Adamidvam, Ahimsa Sancharajavam, Acharya Pasamam, Socham, Staryam Atma Vinigraha, Indriyarte Vairagyam, Anahankara Evacha, Janmamityu Jaravyadi Dukkado Sanadarshanam, Asaktirana Vismam Putra Dara Grihadisu, Nityam Cha Samachitatvam, Istanisto Papadisu, Maichananya Yogeno Bhaktir Avyak. Abhya Vicharine Viviktat Desat Sevityam Arati Janasat Samsadi Adyatmam Gyananityatmam Tattva Gyan Artha Darshanam Etaj Gyanam Iti Proktam Agyanam Yad Atonyata. Now, this is very important to learn. This is real knowledge, as opposed to the junk knowledge that's being taught today. And it begins with humility. Everything else, I mean, there's 20 points, but if there's no humility, all the other points are nullified. This is the most important point, is humility. And one must not be seeking to be honored by whatever they do. They are simply a servant of Krishna, and they give all credit to Krishna and Guru. And they always remain humble and meek. And of course, if Krishna is attacked, or Guru is attacked, or other devotees are attacked, the devotee will protect them. But in general, if they're attacked, they remain humble and meek. Of course, there is self-defense, but if they're attacked verbally, they remain humble and meek. They don't retaliate. They don't become their enemy's enemy. Okay, so this humility is number one most important quality of knowledge. Do they teach this in school? What do you think? Right. They don't tell you. In fact, they teach you self-esteem. Yeah, the high five, You do any nonsense thing, they give you a high five, Yeah, oh, you're great, you're wonderful. But that's not what humility is. Humility is not seeking to be honored. Anyway, we're going to read now these points and their meaning. And we've done it before, but it's so important. This repetition is important. So anyway, it says, the 13th chapter, verses 8 to 12. So you see, we began with the 5 levels of consciousness, or of Brahman realization. Then we went to the 24 elements of the material world and their reactions, right? And now we're coming to the 20 points of real knowledge. Sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 18, but anyway, Prabhupada says 20. So, and then after that, it gets into what is knowable and so many other things that we'll come to. So anyway, it says, this process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually, this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. In other words, if we understand what these 20 points are, then we have a chance. Then we have a very good chance of understanding Krishna. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the 24 elements as described before. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement of those elements. The embodied soul is entrapped by the body, which is a casing made of the 24 elements. And the process of knowledge, as described here, is the means to get out of it. Of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 11th verse. Mai chananya yogena bhaktir abhya vicharine. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So if one does not approach, or is not able to approach, the transcendental service to the Lord, then the other 19 items of are of no particular value. In other words, then the other 19 items are of no particular value. But if one takes to devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, the other 19 items automatically develop within him. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 5:18-12, Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavat yakinchana sarver gunais tatra samasate sura. All the good qualities of knowledge develop in one who has attained the stage of devotional service. The principle of accepting a spiritual master, as mentioned in the 8th verse, is essential, even for one who takes to devotional service. It is most important. Transcendental life begins when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, clearly states here that this process of knowledge is the actual path. Anything speculated beyond this is nonsense. Whoa. So Prabhupada's being very specific here about what is knowledge and what is not knowledge. Now, I did say that humility is the most important thing. Well, let's say that there are two most important things. One is, the primary important thing is surrendering to Krishna and engaging in devotional service. That's, but the secondary most important thing is this humility. So we'll get to that soon. He gets to that near the end of this purport. So then it says, as for knowledge outlined here, he's saying anything besides these 20 points is nonsense. Right? As for the knowledge outlined here, the items may be analyzed as follows. 1. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. Notice it says one should not be anxious to have. One can merit being honored by others, but one should not be anxious to have it, right? One should be more concerned about doing the service rather than being honored. Right? The material conception of life makes us very eager to receive honor from others. But from the point of view of a man in perfect knowledge who knows that he is not this body, anything, honor or dishonor, pertaining to this body is useless. One should not be hankering after this material deception. People are very anxious to be famous for their religion, and consequently sometimes it is found that without understanding the principles of religion, one enters into some group that is not actually following the religious principles and then wants to advertise himself as a religious mentor or a religious teacher, let's say. As for actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he is progressing. He can judge from these items. Now he's going to start going through. Now he's done 2 items so far. That is humility and pridelessness. Okay, now he's starting number 3. Nonviolence is generally taken to mean not killing or destroying the body. But actually, nonviolence means not to put others into distress. By the way, it's very sinful to put other people into distress. It's a sinful act. But people like to do that. They like to put people in distress. Just like, they say, well, on Wednesday there's going to be, so many people are going to lose their job in this company. That puts people in distress, you say. And, or, well, very soon there's going to be an atomic war. That puts everybody in distress, right? Now, it might be true or it might not be true, but you see, every couple of years there's some threat that the whole world is going to come to an end, like Y2K, then the Mayan calendar, right? 2012, the world was supposed to end at that time, and then Russia is saying we're going to nuke the United States, right? So all these things are meant to put people in distress, scare them, and put them in a state of panic. Right? So now this is explaining nonviolence, not put others in distress. People in general are trapped by ignorance in the material concept of life. And he keeps talking about this material concept of life. That's on the board. It's the 4th panel. It's very important to know what it is. We've read it twice. We don't have to read it again. But it's very important that we understand what that material conception of life is. They perpetually suffer material pains. So unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence. One should try his best to distribute real knowledge to the people so that they may become enlightened and leave this material entanglement. That is nonviolence. So you see, this is a dictionary. Prabhupada is redefining words here. But it's not that he's giving his personal definition of these words. These are the actual definitions of the words. And we've said many times, many of the definitions in the dictionary are incomplete or misleading or false or flat out false. So when we read Bhagavad Gita, we learn the real meanings of words. Okay. Tolerance, number 4. Tolerance means that one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor from others. Wow, That's different than what most people would say about tolerance. If one is engaged in the advancement of spiritual knowledge, there will be so many insults and much dishonor from others. This is expected because material nature is so constituted. Even a boy like Prahlad Maharaj, who only 5 years old was engaged in the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, was endangered when his father became antagonistic to his devotion. The father tried to kill him in so many ways, but Prahlada tolerated him. So there may be many impediments to making advancement in spiritual knowledge, but we should be tolerant and continue our progress with determination. Very nice. Most people's tolerance level is like this, almost microscopic. Right away, you say something, they snap at you, right? But a devotee's tolerance is way up here, right? They can tolerate so many things, knowing that Krishna is their protector, and knowing that Krishna consciousness is more important than getting into fights with others. Simplicity means, number 5, that without diplomacy means you use very clever language to mask what you really mean and to try and convince another person of something. But that is cheating, actually. It's not being honest. Well, there is a proper way of being of diplomacy, and there's an improper way of diplomacy. So we will discuss that later on. But here it says, simplicity means that without diplomacy, one should be so straightforward that he can disclose the real truth even to an enemy. As for acceptance of this, okay, so that's number 5. Now number 6, acceptance of spiritual master. That is essential, because without the instruction of a bona fide spiritual master, one cannot progress in the spiritual science. One should approach the spiritual master with all humility and offer him all services so that he will be pleased to bestow his blessings upon the disciple. Because a bona fide spiritual master is a representative of Krishna. If he bestows any blessings upon his disciple, that will make the disciple immediately advanced without the disciples following the regulative principles. Whoa. Or the regulative principles will be easier for one who has served the spiritual master without reservation. There it is. Next, number 7. Cleanliness is essential for making advancement in spiritual life. There are 2 kinds of cleanliness, external and internal. External cleanliness means taking a bath, but for internal cleanliness, one has to think of Krishna always and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This process cleans the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind. So you clean up your karma by chanting Hare Krishna regularly every day. Number 8. Steadiness means that one should be very determined to make progress in spiritual life. Without such determination, one cannot make tangible progress. And self-control means that one should not accept anything, which is, okay, so now next, number 9. Self-control means one should not accept anything which is detrimental to the path of devotion, spiritual progress. One should become accustomed to this and reject anything which is against the path of spiritual progress. This is real renunciation. So this is basically 8, 9, and 10, and this anasankalpa part, anyway, it's accept everything favorable for Krishna consciousness, reject everything unfavorable. Those are the first 2 steps of surrender to the Lord, which are part of the 6 steps of surrender or saranagati, mentioned as the higher Swadharma, or pure Krishna consciousness. Okay, so then next it says, one should become accustomed to this and reject anything which is against the path of spiritual progress. This is real renunciation. The senses are so strong that they are always anxious to have sense gratification. One should not cater to these demands which are not necessary. The senses should only be gratified to keep the body fit so that one can discharge his duty in advancing in spiritual life. So that's number 10. So this is why sometimes it's 18 or sometimes it's 20. Actually, 9 and 10 is accept everything favorable, reject everything unfavorable. Now, number 11, 10 should be actually number 11, but I don't want to confuse everyone. So there's a different way of counting, either 18 or 20, okay? So, and then it says, number 10, one should not cater to the demands which are not necessary. The senses should only be gratified to keep the body fit so that one can discharge his duty and in advancing in spiritual life. The most important uncontrollable sense is the tongue. If one can control the tongue, then there is every possibility of controlling the other senses. The function of the tongue is to taste and to vibrate. Therefore, by systematic regulation, the tongue should always be engaged in tasting the remnants of spiritual food or foodstuffs offered to Krishna and chanting Hare Krishna. Because the tongue has two functions. It vibrates and it tastes. So we should always taste Mahaprasadam, and we should always vibrate the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and Krishna consciousness, glorification of Krishna. Next, as far as the eyes are concerned, they should not be allowed to see anything but the beautiful form of Krishna. That will control the eyes. Similarly, the ears should be engaged in hearing about Krishna, and the nose in smelling the flowers offered to Krishna. This is the process of devotional service, and it is understood here that Bhagavad Gita is simply expounding the science of devotional service. Devotional service is the main and sole objective. Unintelligent commentators on Bhagavad Gita try to divert the mind of the readers to other subjects, but there is no other subject in Bhagavad Gita than devotional service. Okay, that's number 10. Next. False ego means accepting this body as oneself. When one understands that he is not this body and a spirit soul, he comes to his real ego. Ego is there. False ego is condemned, but not real ego. In the Vedic literature, Brihad Aranyayaka Upanishad, it is said, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am spirit. This I am, the sense of self, also exists in a liberated stage of self-realization. That's the Mayavadis would deny that. This sense of I is ego, but when the sense of I am is applied to this false body, it is false ego. When the sense of self is applied to reality, that is real ego. There are some philosophers who say that we should give up our ego, but we cannot give up our ego because ego means identity. We ought, of course, to give up the false identification with the body. Okay. So, let me see what time it is.
It's 7:03.
Yeah. Then next, number 12. One should try to understand the distress of accepting birth, death, old age, and disease. There are descriptions in various Vedic literatures of birth. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the world of the unborn, the child's stay in the womb of the mother is suffering, etc., are all very graphically described. It should be thoroughly understood that birth is distressful because we forget how much distress we have suffered within the womb of the mother. We do not make any solution to the repetition of birth and death. Similarly, at the time of death, there are all kinds of sufferings, and they are also mentioned in the authoritative scriptures. These should be discussed And as far as disease and old age are concerned, everyone gets practical experience. No one wants to be diseased, and no one wants to become old, but there is no avoiding these unless we have a pessimistic view of this material life, considering the distresses of birth, death, old age, and disease. There is no impetus for us making advancement in spiritual life. So there's two sets of four here. One is birth, death, old age, and disease, and the other is meat eating, gambling, intoxication, and illicit sex. These are both undesirable things. And unless we understand that they're undesirable, we don't make any effort to solve the problem of birth, death, old age, and disease. Okay. So then, 13. As for detachment from children, wife, and husband, and home, it is not meant that one should have no feeling for them. They are natural objects of affection, but when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. The best process for making the home pleasant is Krishna consciousness. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy, because this process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. One need only chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Accept the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna, have some discussion on books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and engage oneself in deity worship. These four things will make one happy. One should train the members of his family in this way. The family members can sit down morning and evening and chant together Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. If one can mold his family life in this way to develop Krishna consciousness following these four principles, then there is no need to change from family life to renounced life. But if it is not congenial, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. One must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjuna did. Arjuna did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood that these family members were impediments to his Krishna consciousness, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. So now, we don't want to kill anybody, right? But the best thing to do is to make the family Krishna conscious. Then you don't even have to take sannyas, because you're always engaged in Krishna's service, happily with the family members. Now, when it says Arjuna killed his family, there were two sides of the family. He didn't kill his immediate family, his brothers, and so forth. But he killed the other side of the family, who were demoniac, and that is Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra and so forth. He didn't even kill Dhritarashtra, but Duryodhana and his brothers. Arjuna did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood that these family members were impediments to his spiritual realization, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. In all cases, one should be detached from the happiness and distress of family life, because in this world one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. So happiness and distress is different than being Krishna conscious. Happiness and distress are mundane things. Krishna consciousness is transcendental. So when one is Krishna conscious and has a Krishna conscious family, they're not attached to happiness and distress. They're attached to Krishna and devotional service. So whether they're happy or not happy materially, they continue devotional service. But when people are attached to happiness and distress, they will stop devotional service, or they'll engage in devotional service in a whimsical way and make a joke out of it. See? But the devotees are always serious about engaging in pure devotional service and not being, prone to getting insulted or to be honored. They're just satisfied in serving. Okay, now, and then it says, happiness and distress are concomitant factors of material life. One should learn to tolerate, as advised in Bhagavad Gita. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress. So one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised in both cases. So we're not influenced by happiness and distress when we're in devotional service. We are influenced by the desire to please Krishna, regardless of happiness and distress. Generally, when we get something desirable, we are very happy, and when we get something undesirable, we are distressed. But if we are actually in a spiritual position, these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service. There it is. That's the solution. Unbreakable devotional service. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in 9 processes of devotional service: chanting, hearing, worshiping, offering respect, etc. As described in the last verse of the 9th chapter, that process should be followed. Okay, so then one more. Naturally, when one is adapted to the spiritual way of life, he or she will not want to mix with materialistic men or materialistic people. That would go against his grain. Okay, grain means his preferred way of life. Right? One may test himself by seeing how far he is inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. Naturally, a devotee has no taste for unnecessary sporting or cinema going or enjoying some social function, because he understands that these are simply a waste of time. There are many research scholars and philosophers who study sex life or some other subject, but according to Bhagavad Gita, such research work and philosophical speculation have no value. That is more or less nonsensical. According to Bhagavad Gita, one should make research by philosophical discretion into the nature of the soul. One should make research to understand the self. That is recommended here. Okay, and then as far as self-realization is concerned, it is clearly stated here that Bhakti Yoga is especially practical. As soon as there is a question of devotion, one must consider the relationship between the super soul and the individual soul. The individual soul and the super soul cannot be one, at least not in the Bhakti conception. So, the Mayavadis, they say, the Atma becomes Paramatma at one point. That's complete nonsense. The individual soul and the super soul cannot be one, at least not in Bhakti conception, in the Bhakti conception, the devotional conception of life. This service of the individual soul to the Supreme Soul is eternal, nityam, and it is clearly stated. So bhakti or devotional service is eternal, and one should be established in that philosophical conviction. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 1-11, it is said, Vadanti tattvavitas tattvam yajganam advayam. Those who are actually knowers of the absolute truth know that the self is realized in 3 different phases, as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Bhagavan is the last word in the realization of the absolute truth. Therefore, one should reach up to that platform of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead and thus engage in the devotional service of the Lord. That is the perfection of knowledge. Beginning from practicing, this is what has to be taught to our kids. What is the perfection of knowledge? Beginning from practicing humility up to the point of realization of the Supreme Truth, the absolute personality of Godhead, this process is just like a staircase, beginning from the ground floor and going up to the top floor. Now, on this staircase, there are so many people who have reached the first floor, the second, or the third floor, etc. But unless one reaches the top floor, which is the understanding of Krishna, he is at a lower stage of knowledge. If anyone wants to compete with God and at the same time make advancement in spiritual knowledge, he will be frustrated. It is clearly stated that without humility, understanding is not truly possible. There it is. Without humility, understanding is not truly possible. To think oneself God is most puffed up. Although the living entity is always being kicked by the stringent laws of material nature, he still thinks, I am God, because of ignorance. The beginning of knowledge, therefore, is amanditvam, humility. one should be humble and know that he is subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Due to rebellion against the Supreme Lord, one becomes subordinate to material nature. One must know and be convinced of this truth. So as soon as we are not surrendered to Krishna, we become trapped by Maya in the material world. So therefore, without humility, understanding is not truly possible. So here we see engaging in devotional service is number one importance, but it has to be supported by humility. Otherwise, it won't succeed. Okay, we'll stop right there. The homework, read this purport again. It's very important. It explains so many things and clear any doubts in our mind about what Krishna consciousness actually is and how to engage in it properly. Tomorrow we're going to hear the same thing, but it's in the Ishopanishad, and it gives a little bit more deeper perspective of what these 20 points of knowledge are. This is very important because we don't understand what is real knowledge. Therefore, we're subjecting our kids to be educated in nonsense. Right? Are there any questions?
Now it's clear, Maharaj, non-violence. What Gandhiji did, you were saying some time back. What Gandhiji did, non-violence is not correct.
Yeah.
But here, with seeing the real meaning of non-violence, now it relates.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was putting people in distress.
Yeah.
You know.
Yes.
He was not stopping the separation of India because he was a hodgepodge person. You know. That's why reading Bhagavad Gita carefully is very important. We learn the real definition of words.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Yeah. Maharaj, about the tolerance. So we know Krishna is our protector.
Yeah.
But when someone is insulting and we are trying to tolerate, but how we can tolerate without getting disturbed at that point, at that moment?
Because what's being hurt is not you. You can go to a doctor and say, look, I was insulted, I'm hurt. He'll analyze you and say, but there's nothing wrong in your body. So what is it that got hurt? It's called the false ego. But that's not who you are, the false ego. It's something false. So you cannot be insulted because your soul is eternal. Only your false ego gets insulted. And that's why you get all red and angry and you want to get badla, revenge. But it's not, you haven't been hurt, it's your false ego that's hurt. The real ego cannot get hurt because it's eternal. False ego can get hurt because it's something false. Right? So you have to be convinced of this. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting all the time. People are going to insult you all the time. That's the nature of the material world. Okay, so we'll have Aarti. Guru Puja. Do you want to chant, Mataji? No? Yes? Okay. Shri Guru.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma.
Bando mui savdhan mate.
Bando mui savadana mate.
Sahara prasade bhai e bhava toriya jai.
Janara Prasade Bhai E Bhavatai
कृष्ण प्राप्ति होए जहाँ होए ते
Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite
गुरु मुख पद्मावक्या चिते ते कोरिया क्या
Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Koriya
अरना कोरी हो मन आशा
Arana Koriya Mane Asa
श्री गुरु चरणे रति इसे उत्तम गति
Shri Guru Charane Rati Ese Uttamagati
जे प्रसाद पूरे सर्व आशा
Prasade Pure Sarva Asa
चखुदान दिलो जे जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से
Chakshudan Dilaje Janme Janme Prabhu Se
दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो
Divya Gyan Hriday Prakasito
प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते
Prema Bhakti Jaha Hoite Avidya Vinasajate
वेदे गाय जहारा चरितो
Vede Gai Janara Charito
श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनारा बंधु
Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu
लोकनाथ लोकेरा जीवाना
Lokenath Lokera Jivana
हाँ प्रभु कोरो दया देहो मोरे पद छाया
Maha Prabhu Kora Doya Deha More Padachaya
हाँ प्रभु कोरो दया देहो मोरे पद छाया
Maha Prabhu Kora Doya Deha More Padachaya
ए बेजा शाखो शुक्ति भुवाना
Ebe Astu Sukti Bhavana
प्रभु पाद पतिता पवाना
Prabhupada Patita Pavana
जय प्रभु पदा जय प्रभु पदा जय प्रभु पदा जय प्रभु पदा
Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada
नमा ओम विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रस्थाय भूतले श्रीमती भक्ति वेदांता स्वामिनिति नामिने
Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namani
नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine
जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य
Chaitanya
प्रभु नित्यानंदा
Nityananda
श्री अद्वैता गदाधर शिवसदि Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Hare Krishna, Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare Hare,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Bolo Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gora
Nitya
Hari Bol.
Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura Hari Bol.
Nitai Gora Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Gora Hari Bol, Nitai Gora Hari Bol, Nitai Gora Premanandi Ki Jai.
Nitya Gaura Premanand ki jai.
Hari Bol.
Hari
Jai Om
Bol.
Vishnupad Paramahansa Parvajika Chastata Satra Shishi Shimad. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Shri Gaur Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Samkunda Radha Kunda Giri Gordhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapura Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Tulasi Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Ganga Maya Ki Jai. Jamuna Maya Ki Jai. Samveda Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanand. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guru and all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Patita Pavana Ki Jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vistaya Bhutali Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanami Namaste Saraswati Devi Gurvani Chanani The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain the pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet, great honor. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Jesus. I only wish to have my conscience purified by the wisdom of his attachment to his lotus feet, perfection, fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with
Prem. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master, the scene of mercy, the friend of the poor, and the Lord and the master of devotees. O Lokanath Goswami, O Master, be merciful unto me. Give me the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread all over the three worlds.